Hello, everybody. This is my second message for our Introduction to Philosophy class. I want to let everyone know that the work I've been seeing so far is pretty good. So it's only a day in. It's been interesting to see y'all's response to my questions about, what kind of popular culture you're the most interested in. I myself, if you didn't read the comments, and if you can't tell, am a super fan of Star Wars. I've been doing Star Wars since the first summer the original movie opened in 1977. Because I'm over 50, and I saw the original movie 23 times in the theaters the first summer it came out. So I've been kind of a lifelong fan because of that. But I try to bring everything that I do back into a kind of philosophical question. So if you look at Star Wars or the Harry Potter series or Star Trek, or really almost any kind of series, the Marvel universe, any anime that goes on for more than one season, there's something called world building that happens. And anybody who's familiar with playing video games online, multiple player video games, there's a certain amount of there's a certain amount of world building that goes into what you're doing. An interesting aspect of this has been that people get very caught up in the narratives, and they get so caught up that they not only become very familiar with that world that's been created by the author or the director, or whether you're reading a book or watching a TV series or a movie or playing a video game. They get very caught up in that, and that's actually led to something called fan fiction. I'm sure some of y'all know about this. But fan fiction is not only writing stories, but Star Trek and Star Wars especially have a very avid base of fans who make their own movies and their own series, so they can explore more deeply these storylines that have moved them in some fashion. Well, so why am I starting off talking about that? I mean, what y'all are doing this week is primarily looking over Plato to get an idea of how philosophizing is, where you see it, certain basic concepts like the theory of knowledge or epistemology, the theory of reality or metaphysics, things like that. The basic idea here is to get you familiar with the notion, sort of the standard ideas of philosophy as a way of life, but also as a way of thinking or a way of being in the world. I think a key component from what y'all are reading this week, and I'll go into this at more length with my office hour lecture this afternoon that I'll take up at 1 o'clock. But the real task of philosophizing, in a sense, is to move out of the dark into the light, right? It's to move out of ignorance into comprehension, okay? And you do that in different kinds of stages, right? So as a child, you're born and you have to learn in order to survive in the world. So anybody who has made it to college has met certain kinds of conditions, we can say. You've gotten at least to the point of being a legal adult. You're probably 18 years old, at least. You've learned to read, you've learned to write, you've learned to use basic reasoning skills and learning skills to increase the amount of knowledge you have, the amount of information you're able to utilize. So these basic conditions that kind of have to be made. But that shouldn't be actually confused, that all of that instruction you've received and all of those skills that you've been able to develop shouldn't be confused for education. Education is more like the allegory of the cave that Plato talks about in the Republic, which you read an excerpt of. You read about the allegory of the cave. And again, I'll go into this in more detail in a longer lecture, but this is for people who may not have time to watch the longer lecture and just want to get a kind of like heads up from the professor about stuff. And in that regard, I think when you're talking about education, you're actually talking about what leads you out of ignorance, how you lead out of ignorance, right? Actually, the word educate comes from Latin educare. Exducare would be the two parts of the word. Ex, as an exit, means to go out, okay? And ducare is the same word as duke. In introduction, it means to lead. So a duke is a leader, a war leader on the battlefield. That's actually where the title originally came from before it became a bunch of aristocratic fops in fancy clothes. So a duke is a leader. So ex ducare, educare means to lead out. And primarily what's being talked about here is that you're being led out of ignorance, led out of the dark, right? But who's doing the leading? Is it some mysterious hand, as in the allegory of the cave, where someone just chooses a prisoner at random and grabs them and then says, okay, we're going to force this person out and show you what happens when you go from being constrained in the dark to being completely free in the sunlight? Is it that? Is it that sort of like accident? Is it purely by chance? The person sees that the chains of their ignorance are looser than they remembered, and they suddenly break out of the chains. Maybe they hadn't even known the chains were there before, but now that they're loose, they hear them and they break out. It's all, again, allegory and metaphor, but the point here is what leads to education versus instruction. Notice that in the allegory of the cave, it's very easy to lose sight of some of the small details that are in there, but in the allegory of the cave, Plato has Socrates paint a picture in which you can actually say everybody who's chained looking at shadows has been instructed, because there's actually a hierarchy of people who are in chains, and the hierarchy is based on who, through the instruction of watching, through the instruction of listening to the other people that are chained talking about the shadows, they come to be able to predict the next shadow that's going to happen, or predict what the shadows are going to do after this. That predictive ability is one of the powers of being human, but if it's only instructed to look at the dark, pre-established, prefabricated patterns, right, and it's not honed, it can be instructed to do a lot with shadows, but it's not really doing anything substantial. So the point here is that philosophers realize, in some sense, not that they're the wisest people, they don't, right? Because philosophy doesn't mean, to be the wisest. It means to love wisdom, to seek after wisdom, to befriend cleverness and befriend wisdom, befriend prudence, all of these things. You're a friend of these kinds of pragmatic wisdoms and theoretical wisdoms. This is what you love, it's what you care about. And there's something interesting in this whole notion of wisdom for us, because in English, the word wisdom actually derives from two words in Anglo-Germanic, which mean vision and fate, or vision and doom. So literally the word wisdom means doomed to see. Vision, doomed to see. If we are seeking after wisdom because we want to befriend wisdom, befriend prudence, befriend thinkering, befriend cleverness, we literally are embracing our doom to see the world as it is. And that's very different from just looking at shadows, right? That's very different from just accepting what you've been told, how you've been told, where you're supposed to go, what you're supposed to do, all those kind of things. It's extremely different. Now there's a lot of responsibility on you. So the question becomes, how much do you want to just go along to get along, and how much do you actually want to be free? Because there's no freedom if the mind itself is in chains. And an interesting aspect of the allegory of the cave is that in the original Greek, if you read it very carefully, it actually paints a picture. If you stop and you think about what's being described, it actually paints a picture of the inside of the head. It says that it's a cave that you go into. It has multiple openings to get in, right? Your ears, your eyes, your nose, your mouth, and that it's like the lights are being projected. The flames in the old days, the ancient days of the Greeks, they thought the eyes had a flame in them. That's what allowed them to see. Okay, and so there's this projection onto the back of your head of your ideas, and if we stop and we think about it, a lot of times the way that we imagine our we imagine ideas in our heads or whatever, it's almost like watching a movie, right? A shadow play that's being projected in our mind. So the idea of freedom here is, how do you get the person to recognize that they've accepted a sort of state of affairs that's being projected into them, and they're not questioning that. They're just simply going along with the narrative, right? So philosophers have always been not hated necessarily, but held in suspicion, because the first thing that they do when they get active is they ask, why is this the case? Why do we do this? How can we do this? Now there's a way that you can see how these questions lead slowly but surely to a new certainty in art. They can lead slowly but surely to new certainties in religion. They can lead slowly but surely to new certainties in what we call science. But the point here is that sometimes you begin to ask these questions and you actually are very uncertain about what the outcome will be when you challenge. And so you have to be willing to accept the idea, or accept the doom or the fate, that being free means a lot of times you reject what everybody else believes, right? And then the question becomes, is your rejection a rational rejection based on the fact that what everyone believes has no real affirmation in reality? Or is it merely a reaction to possibly other people coming up with new ideas and new ways of thinking that make you uncomfortable, right? So is it a response to the world that you live in, where you accept the doom that you're doomed to see if you really want to be free, right? Or is it a reaction of, oh no, that makes me feel uncertain, uncertain makes me feel insecure, insecurity means I need to reject this and not think about it. And of course that's actually what happens in the allegory when the person has gone from looking at the wall to turning around and seeing the things that are actually projecting the shadows, and then going past those, and then getting out and then seeing real rabbits and real flowers and real trees, and then finally realizing that the sun up above, this light that's coming down, giving life to everything and making everything distinct and capable of being understood, that when that person goes back into the cave, and notice this is a standard. I think one of the reasons we had a Buddhist reading here on top of this, the Platonic reading, is because it's a standard operating procedure for for people seeking wisdom, philosophers or the lovers of wisdom, to actually recognize that they may have to go back into the world if they maybe come up with an insight or they've had some sort of enlightenment or something like that, that they have to go back into the world and tell other people about it, and then more than likely most people are not going to want to hear it, and that it's quite possible some people are going to find it very threatening. Okay? So both Buddha or Siddhartha Gautama, who is historically called the Buddha, the awakened one, both Buddha and Socrates lived within a few decades of each other. One, of course, in northern India, Nepal, and then one in Attic, Greece, but at Athens. But the thing is that they had very similar ideas about the fact that more than likely they're going to be misunderstood when they ask people to question the shadows that they've come to think of as substantial. Okay, well, I've already gone a little over. I said I was going to try to make these 10-minute videos. This is a 15-minute video or so sorry about that. But I did want to get in there and get a little thinking. I will be online later today. If you can't be online during the Zoom meeting, you are going to be able to watch a recording of it later. Yesterday I ended up not saying anything because I was kind of hoping maybe some people would show up with questions. Today I've kind of got a standard wrap that I'll start with, and I'll probably do a longer lecture that I hope y'all will find compelling and helpful for you. All right, I'll talk to you a little later. Bye-bye.